Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for coming today. My name is Eric Jansen, but before we get started with today's presentation, I'd like to start off by asking you a question. How many of you have struggled to communicate with someone when English isn't necessarily their primary language? Just a show of hands. That's what I'd expect. In today's increasingly international business world, you can expect to experience that more and more. So today, we're going to be talking about strategies that you can use to cope with communicating with someone when English isn't their primary language. But before we do that, I'd like to give you a brief outline of what we're going to be looking at today. First off, we're going to be looking at what exactly is communication, which is going to be followed up by looking at the challenges of communicating with someone when English isn't their primary language. After that, we're going to talk about some potential solutions to help mitigate the difficulties that one might experience in such a situation, which is going to be followed by a conclusion and an opportunity for you to ask me any questions you might have. So, without any further ado, let's get started. First off, what is communication? Communication is the act of expressing one's thoughts, ideas, or feelings through either verbal or physical cues. And in communication, you're always going to have a sender and a recipient. Now, or a sender who sends the message and a recipient who receives the message. Now, when you have two people who have different levels of competency in one language, there's three opportunities for hiccups in this communication cycle. First, the sender might not be able to properly communicate their idea to the recipient. Second, the recipient might not be able to properly analyze and understand what the person is saying. And third, even if the recipient can understand what the sender is trying to say, they might have difficulty sending appropriate feedback and responding in the appropriate manner. This can lead to challenges in the business environment. First off, when you can't communicate adequately with someone in your office, it makes it difficult to build and foster a positive working relationship. This is due to the fact that it can be frustrating when you can't communicate with someone. If I have, for example, if I have a really good idea and I'm trying to pitch this marketing idea, this new strategy that will really take our business to the next level, but I can't communicate to the board of directors or I can't adequately express myself to fellow peers within my marketing group, then I feel frustrated and the company as a whole loses out because they are unable to act on my idea. So how do we solve this problem? First off, accept discomfort. When you're communicating with someone whose primary language isn't English, you can expect to feel uncomfortable at times. Rather than blame either your misunderstanding or their misunderstanding on below average intelligence or they're speaking too fast, accept the discomfort and move on with the conversation. Second, ignore body language. In different cultures, there's different norms of interacting with people physically. For example, in Western culture, I might walk up and offer to shake his hand when I meet him during a business meeting, whereas in an Eastern culture, I might just bow as a sign of respect. So understand that differences in physical interaction and differences in body language doesn't necessarily mean that you're trying to insult someone or they're trying to insult you. It's just a difference in norms of socially acceptable behavior. So accept that, embrace it, and move on. Third, communicate clearly. Communicate concisely. When you're communicating with someone whose primary language isn't English, use 50 words, and when 50 words are necessary, don't use 100, because every added word that you add to communication is an extra opportunity for the person to misunderstand you, misinterpret what you're saying, and can really bog down the issue. So when you can communicate concisely and say what has to be said and nothing more, it really makes it easier for you to communicate with that person. The fourth solution is to communicate clearly. When you go into a conversation with someone, this is just a good tip in general, but particularly when you go into a conversation with someone whose primary language isn't English, if you communicate clearly with them and know what you're going to say, avoid using complex phrases, avoid using analogies or phrases that might not be analogous across cultures, it really helps ease the communication. So, to conclude, in today's increasingly interconnected business world, there's going to be situations where you're unable, or not unable, excuse me, where you communicate with people who do not speak English as their primary language. Rather than let this lead to negative business interactions, there are 4 steps you can use to make the process easier for yourself and for the other person. First, accept discomfort. Second, ignore body language. Third, communicate concisely. And fourth, communicate clearly. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time, and now I'm open to any questions.
When you said ignore body language, would it be like wise to try to understand their body language as well, or should you just kind of disregard that whole?
Well, it's always good to go into a foreign culture with some understanding of local custom. For example, if I were traveling to Japan, it would probably be a good idea to look up, maybe online or look in a guidebook on the region, what's acceptable and proper greeting of another person. But try not to be offended by, if for example, if someone scratches their nose with their middle finger, that doesn't necessarily mean they're flipping you off. It could just mean they're scratching their nose with their middle finger. So it's more of just, if you have knowledge of the culture, great, but if something happens that you're not expecting, which frequently does, don't be acted offended by it.
So these were tips with dealing with English as a second language. Are these appropriate tips you think when dealing with other languages too?
So if I'm someone let's say I'm a German who's communicating with someone else who doesn't speak German as their primary language,
Exactly.
Absolutely these tips carry across. I applied them to the English setting, but if it works with any language. If you're a German trying to speak to a Japanese person, and the Japanese person's grasp of the German language isn't that great, or you're a German person trying to speak with someone who speaks English, and their grasp of German isn't that great, you can definitely follow these tips to ease the difficulties of communication. Any other questions?
There have been several presentations on the role of body language and how much of a message is communicated through body language. When you say ignore body language, I wonder, and maybe this was the answer you gave when you were answering Anna's question, I kind of don't get distracted by
That I'd say it's synonymous. When I say ignore, I more mean if there's something that you're not expecting, or if there's a hand gesture, or for example, as I mentioned, the bowing instead of the handshake, don't let that throw you off your stride. Just understand that there's differences in cultural norms. Any other questions? All right, excellent. Thank you very much for your time.